Stemming from capitalism, neoliberalism is an ideology centered around laissez-faire economics and freedom of the market. It's an ideology of economic liberalism, favoring the individual and against government intervention. Furthermore, neoliberalism has become a powerful force in the United States and is present in all social institutions, including higher education. More specifically, the manifestation of neoliberalism in colleges and universities is known as academic capitalism. Academic capitalism, and it's referring to the involvement of colleges and faculty in market-like behaviors, is highlighted when colleges and universities transform their basic functions of teaching, research, and service into revenue-generating operations. For example, many colleges have contracts with corporations in which they sell their knowledge and technology directly to those businesses. All points considered, academic capitalism and neoliberalism in higher education has caused education to be dominated by individualistic goals and extrinsic benefits in which students are consumers of an educational product. This is because neoliberalism, by favoring the individual over society as a whole, is responsible for the commodification and privatization of higher education. In other words, neoliberalism turned colleges and universities into businesses whose product of education is not publicly attainable and whose customers, that being students, purchase with individualistic motives. For due to colleges not being free and public, one wouldn't attend for a collective experience, but solely for their own benefit. Furthermore, college has become an individual experience, with the main reason for attending being a well-paying job in one's future. In fact, looking at Aston's survey from 1966 to 1996, we see this self-focused motivation, the first being a 71 agreement with the statement, the chief benefit of a college education is to increase one's earning power, going up from 54% in 1969. Then we have nearly 3/4 of students saying their reason for attending college is to be able to make more money, going up from 1/2 in 1971. Seeing this, not only does it reveal that college is attended because of a student's individual goals or desired outcomes from school, but how higher education is fairly new to neoliberalism. For it wasn't until the late 70s and early 80s, the time where neoliberalism arose and dominated, that the motivations and goals for attending college changed. However, being free of neoliberalism didn't mean that the U.S. higher education system was easily accessible to all beforehand. For up until World War II, nearly all U.S. colleges and universities were of predominantly white upper-class male students. In other words, higher education aligned with the dominant culture of the United States. However, this isn't to say that women and minorities, though only Jews and Asians, weren't part of these institutions, but that non-white male students were small in number and marginalized. For instance, during the late 1800s and early 1900s, women who attended co-educational colleges found themselves as unwanted and unwelcome outsiders and were excluded from many aspects of campus life, such as clubs and organizations. As a result, women enrolled at co-educational colleges formed their own literary societies, clubs, and even their own student government organizations that were all separate but also lower in status from the ones of their male counterparts. Furthermore, it was during the years of World War II that this began to change. The war, because of causing a decline in male enrollment for college, had allowed more women to attend institutions of higher education. Seeing this, it was during the 1940s that women began receiving entry to the ring of college both academically and socially, for during World War II and along with the civil rights movement later on, impacted higher education by bringing diversity and thus dismantled the dominant white male superiority, at least for women in some cases. Today, many, though not all, of the female organizations at co-educational colleges prior to World War II no longer exist. Women are now more so on equal footing with men in higher education. However, for Black and other racial minority groups, who also gained greater access to public and private universities after both World War II and the civil rights movement, it's a different story. Black people, in particular, by being subjected to single-race colleges and universities, felt like outsiders at institutions that were predominantly white. For even though higher education had become integrated after the civil rights movement, Black people during then didn't feel like they were wanted or welcomed. Thus, unlike the female students in the early 1900s, they formed their own organizations, clubs, and sports teams. Though unlike many of the women's organizations, the Black and other racial minority groups, organizations that were created after segregation in the late 60s and early 70s, are still operating to this day. This includes the Black Student Alliance, 1968, the Black Student Movement, 1967, and the Black Student Union, 1969. While these organizations and other related groups have given feelings of belonging and voices to minority students on predominantly white campuses, they are still subordinate to the white-dominated campus-wide organizations. The reason for this and why minority organizations continue to exist in higher education environment today goes back to neoliberalism. Neoliberalism, with favoring the individual over the collective whole, was adopted by colleges and universities after the end of segregation, when colleges started to become more diverse. This is because higher education, like all other social institutions, is controlled and aligned with the dominant culture and group, the upper class white male. In neoliberalism, by turning colleges and universities into businesses whose educational project is often not affordable to many working class and non-white people, it is what has kept the dominant upper class white male in power. Furthermore, neoliberalism is a way of creating hegemony. It's so that the ruling class can dominate the lower class and maintain control, both politically, economically, and culturally. Thus, and in specifically employing cultural power, the ruling class inculcates their dominant views on the lower classes, which as a result leads to many things unquestioned. In other words, neoliberalism prevents thoughts of change and the power of constructing alternate realities for oppressed people. However, it also limits thoughts of change beyond the dominant view for those who aren't oppressed, especially in regards to higher education. This is because, and as mentioned before, neoliberalism has created college to be seen as an individual experience. All students don't go to college for others, but to receive a well-paying job in the future. In addition, students typically choose a school that they personally see themselves succeeding at, and a major that is either of their own interest or one that opens doors to well-paying occupations. As a result, many students, particularly ones who are white and or upper class, don't often think about how some students may be marginalized by a college. Rather, they mostly think about their own grades, classes, and well-beings. Because of this lack of awareness in others, the white dominant culture is kept in power, and many non-white students join and continue the minority organizations that were formed in the 60s and 70s. And with these minority students being also subjected to seeing higher education as an individual experience, they may feel that leading and joining or even creating a racially or culturally based organization as something they decided to do personally. However, and despite this often being the case, this is nevertheless what the institution wants out of minority students. For if truth be told, the separation of organizations and programs between the ruling and lower class continues the hegemony present in higher education. Thus, one must look beyond the individualistic view to bring forth change. The first place to look is college advertising. Why is it that schools have students of all backgrounds on their pamphlets and web pages? Why are colleges and universities saying they value diversity when they are in reality branding and selling an individual experience? In short, it's because colleges are businesses and are trying to raise their diversity numbers. For this reason, a variety of different cultural organizations can be found on most college campuses, and a plethora of student aid programs addresses students, many of which being low income and Black, Indigenous people of color, as leaders and change agents. And while this may appear inclusive on the college's end, these measures and reached goals in bringing diversities to a campus is what has pressured and subjected minority students to being of the good student. In other words, it's what makes non-white students feel expected to have above average grades, behavior, and involvement with multicultural student clubs, committee service, and other administratively connected roles, which are generally eager for diverse student participation. All in all, students have come to see higher education as an individual experience, whether they know it or not. But in looking at college advertising, which is a relatively new concept, we see how neoliberalism, and thus the college brand as an individual experience, is something that affects all students differently and as something that isn't entirely hidden.
College advertising is a multifaceted business as it not only looks to attract potential students, but advertisements attempt to attract the eyes of parents. Aside from the student themselves, parents are a prime decision maker when acceptance letters begin to roll in. And even before that, parents have influence on which colleges their kids look into. Some may argue the final decision on which college a student will attend lies in the hands of the parents, as they typically have the most experience and logical view throughout the college application process. They also serve as an incredibly useful marketing tool for colleges that students may have missed in their own research. For example, many parents attempt to push their children in the same direction they went by attending the same college they did, or showing their kid a local college to keep them close to home. Thus, it is incredibly important for college advertising to appeal to parents, as they will likely be aiding or guiding their child's research, application, and decision process. Parents tend to focus on the practical application of the school's education and experience. Here, diversity plays an enormous role. Parents, especially those affluent enough to be able to consider sending their children to college, seek to send their kid away from the environment they were raised in order to introduce them to a new group of people with diverse backgrounds and perspectives. Diversity has become a spotlight, marketable attribute of school's culture. Advertisers use diversity as it emphasizes both the importance of the multitude of perspectives and ideas that comes with variety, while also highlighting the importance of an individual child's perspective. Parents want the assurance that their child will be a cherished and meaningful person within a complex and evolving diverse community. A diverse community fosters unity and empathy with an emphasis on individualism. It is the perfect crossroads between the connections a student will seek in their field as well as the confidence and self-discovery they go to school to achieve. For all of these reasons, diversity has become an incredibly popular college brand attribute through their advertising. However, the benefits of diversity have spread ethical considerations on the topic of admitting a diverse population of students solely for the purpose of being able to display numbers that showcase a relatively equal and broad range of ethnicities and race. The obviously negative and unethical implications of such a strategy have resulted in lawsuits among some of the most prestigious institutions over the last few years. While diversity is an enormous part of college advertising, it's important to recognize that it is only one part of the advertised college brand culture. A college's brand is what interests people into touring or researching the school, applying to it, and or selecting the school. There are 4 basic types of school brands. First are national brand schools. These are typically the easiest to market and attract applicants to. These include Harvard, Yale, UCLA, and other big brand schools that tend to have a reputation that precedes them. They are household names that do not need to worry about consistently building and maintaining a unique brand, as the culture of the school has been established for many years. The brand culture of these colleges are known worldwide, referenced in pop culture, notable on broadcast television, and most have notable alumni that help bolster the reputation of the school's brand. All of these serve as forms of innovative, creative, and subliminal methods of advertisement. The brand culture of these schools are so popular that oftentimes we see people wearing the school attire regardless of if they attend the school or even in the college student age range. BC Eagle shirts and UCLA shirts are common attire among every demographic and all help promote the school brand as well as its world-renowned reputation. Next are regional brands with a strong brand culture within a state or region that provides a consistent and often hefty applicant pool. Their brand culture typically reflects the region in which they reside, with strong ties to many of the hometowns of each of its students and a well-kept reputation within their state. Next, there are local schools, which typically promote their modest cost and application requirements as a draw to the school and part of their brand culture. Lastly, there are specialty brands. They, similar to the national brand schools, do not have an issue with effective marketing and filling seats as they have a nice reputation that suits their sales demographic. Emerson is a prime example of a specialty brand school, as its reputation as one of the most prestigious liberal arts colleges is very reputable in the niche demographic that we are all a part of as creators, artists, journalists, and more. Without a brand culture, it is virtually impossible to sell a college to a parent or student as there is no experience to present. Brand cultures are an accumulation of the unique attributes of a particular college. They help a school stand out. Brand cultures are the result of neoliberalism and an emphasis on individualism, as they serve as a foundation for the memories and experience one student may obtain by attending a school. In other words, it is a tool that allows potential students to project themselves into the school's culture and imagine their fit. Brand cultures are the most successful marketing tool in advertising colleges, as an attractive brand culture can sell practically any applicant. Brand cultures are only successful at their capitalistic goal when the entire school lives the brand. Over several decades, Emerson has made many strategic moves to ensure the school's brand culture is alive and well. From relocating to a more recognizable and affluent location, to rebranding its student population as well as its marketable tools, Emerson is a business with a very strong brand culture.
One of Emerson's mission statements, stated explicitly on their website, is to recruit students of diverse backgrounds by creating enrollment and pathway programs. They advertise themselves to be a university that's inclusive of all people of races and backgrounds. And though an overwhelming majority of students across private institutions in America are white, Emerson is still no exception to this statistic. Their website reports that 58% of their students are Caucasian, and aside from those numbers alone, Emerson only fundamentally perpetuates the exact opposite of their ideals. Wealth inequality in Boston has always been a prevalent issue. Boston's economy has continued to grow in prosperity, but for whom? The more time goes on, the more economic mobility begins to decline and areas of the city become more homogeneous. One of the most alluring assets of the city of Boston, especially for college students, is the notion of affluence and grandeur city living has to offer, but this is only if you neglect the ever-present poverty rates. Living in Boston isn't cheap, certainly if you're a college student, and even more certainly if you attend Emerson College. Truthfully, living on the corner of Boylston and Tremont is great. there's no denying that living in the theater district of the city and being only a few steps away from the T is an exceptional experience. However, at the same time, you can still peer out of your window facing the Commons to see a homeless population that's trying to find sanctuary within the park. It's just one blistering example of the wealth discrepancies existent in Boston. Just take a ride off campus and you'll be in Chinatown, where there's an even more staggering amount of homeless people to be observed in an overall significantly poor district of the city alone. Chinatown exists as one of the most jetting examples of gentrification in Boston and how cheap real estate has come to serve college students like us while pushing out many families and residents that came before. Prior to how things are now, Chinatown used to be notoriously referred to as the Combat Zone and Satan's Playground. It used to stand as the adult entertainment district of the city and was ridden with crime, prostitution, and overall danger. It was one of the most unappealing and racially mixed parts of Boston, but the rise of VCR technology, the AIDS epidemic, and overall cheap real estate values left the Combat Zone to not only disintegrate but be reestablished into what we know to be modern-day Chinatown. The Boston Redevelopment Authority established a number of urban renewal projects in the area, and Emerson College and Suffolk University were able to buy property in the area to make administrative buildings and dormitories. Over time, Chinatown has seen a drastic change in property value because of restorations of buildings like the Boston Opera House and an implementation of the Ritz-Carlton, and this has only had detrimental effects to the area's previous community. Asian-owned businesses are finding it hard to hold on to their leases, and because of so many restorations, Chinatown has now one of the highest median rent of Boston's neighborhoods. The Boston Public Health Commission found that the white population living in Chinatown has rapidly increased and even exceeded that of Asian residents between 2000 and 2010, and this is because of how the cost of living has gone up. Asians make up less than half of the district's residents and have the second highest rate of poverty in Boston. Given all of this information, it's important to consider if Emerson really is a space that welcomes diversity and is all-encompassing of different backgrounds. Perhaps we need to reconsider what this individual experience really means. Given the evidence suggested, Emerson is a fundamentally exclusive institution. Our campus proves that we're incredibly privileged to be lent the opportunity to live in such a bustling part of Boston. But at the same time, it's important to be aware of the fact that it's at the expense of many suffering to keep up with our rate of comfortability. It's in the pursuit of trying to make ourselves better that we're actually harming different communities in the city. We hope this project helped you to consider what you can learn outside of campus, and if the instilled capitalistic values of our society that have brought us here really do promote the concept of inclusivity or a space where everyone matters.